What would you do if someone vanished without a trace, while standing right next to you? In the mysterious Bennington Triangle, that's exactly what happened. From a veteran disappearing off a bus to a guide leading a group into the woods, only to vanish forever, this eerie region holds secrets that defy explanation. Could you be next? Stay tuned, because what we uncover might make you think twice about stepping foot in this place. The Bennington Triangle, a place of fear and folklore, nestled in the remote stretches of Vermont's Green Mountains, lies a place that has carved its name into the annals of eerie folklore and unsettling mystery. They call it the Bennington Triangle, a region defined by its isolation, its history, and its chilling reputation. Centered around the dense, imposing Glastonbury Mountain, and sprawling out to include the nearby towns of Bennington, Glastonbury, Woodford, Shaftesbury, and Somerset. This area might look like a peaceful retreat to the untrained eye, but beneath the picturesque mountain views and quiet hiking trails is something darker, something local legends have long warned about. The Native American Abenaki tribe, who lived in these lands long before European settlers arrived, believed Glastonbury Mountain was a forbidden place. To them, it was cursed, a strange and sacred pocket of the world where the rules of nature might not apply. Stories were passed down through generations of hunters and gatherers who avoided the mountain's upper slopes. They spoke of powerful winds that seemed to almost repel visitors, valleys and ridges where people wandered and were never seen again, and forces that could not be explained. The Abenaki called it a place their people entered, but seldom left, a land where even the bravest didn't dare to linger. As the years passed and settlements like Glastonbury and Somerset began to spring up, the ominous warnings were set aside by small communities eager to tame this rugged wilderness. But fate had other plans. Both towns grew slowly, their population numbers never reaching beyond the hundreds. Miners came for a while, pulled by the promise of coal deposits hidden beneath the rugged hillsides. Loggers soon followed, cutting roads into the deepest parts of the forest. Temporary cabins and mining camps littered the area, and the sound of saws and blasting echoed across the slopes. By the late 1800s, Glastonbury itself was officially incorporated, and for a brief moment in its obscure history, it seemed there might be life here. But it didn't last. By the turn of the century, industries in the region began dying out. The coal supply dried up. Logging slowed under regulations to protect Vermont's forests, and with no steady economic foundation to keep them there, the workers and their families moved on. That left Glastonbury, Somerset, and their surrounding hamlets little more than ghost towns. There was no rush to repopulate, no crowds of new settlers eager to relight a dying hearth in the wilderness. Instead, homes and cabins collapsed under decades of snow, trails were reclaimed by the trees, and what little remained of human presence was swallowed by nature. Today, Glastonbury itself stands as a shell of its former self, the outline of old railways and dirt roads disappearing into the underbrush, stone foundations buried beneath ivy, and an eerie quiet that presses against you when you wander too far into the woods. This isolation is one of the defining features of the Bennington Triangle. The forest here seems endless, its canopy so thick that even on sunny days, the light barely reaches the forest floor. Streams carve their way through rocky ravines and moss-covered boulders, winding toward valleys that always feel like they're dipping deeper than they should. The trails are steep and unforgiving, and if you're not careful, it's easy to lose your direction entirely. You might look back and realize the landmarks you swore were there are nowhere to be found. You might call out, but in the weight of the silence, even your voice feels swallowed up. It doesn't help that some say compasses go haywire near certain spots on Glastonbury Mountain. Stories of hikers and hunters who thought they were walking straight, only to find themselves circling the same place for hours, add to the uneasy air that clings to the triangle. But the forest and its geographic oddities aren't the only things that haunt this area. The Native American stories of people vanishing weren't the last to emerge from the triangle. Between 1945 and 1950, a wave of strange disappearances gripped the towns around Glastonbury Mountain. These weren't random accidents or explainable tragedies. They were true vanishings, cases where people seemingly faded out of existence, leaving behind no tracks, no evidence, no goodbyes. It's these disappearances that earned the Bennington Triangle its dark reputation and its name, coined decades later by author Joseph A. Citro, as he wrote about Vermont's paranormal history. The first to disappear in 1945 was Mitty Rivers, an experienced hunter and lifelong outdoorsman. The events surrounding his case are chilling, but his story was only the beginning. Within 5 years, 4 more individuals would vanish under equally baffling circumstances. Each disappearance carried eerie similarities, little threads that began to weave a fabric of patterns, coincidences, or something more sinister. From hikers on popular trails to children playing near familiar homes, these victims seemed to have no reason to disappear. Yet, they were gone all the same. And darker still are the clues left behind, if you can call them that. In most cases, there was nothing. No dragged footsteps, no torn clothes, no blood. Even the instances of scent trails picked up by trained search dogs would suddenly end, as if the missing person had been plucked straight out of the world. Some vanished from places as public as buses or well-populated trails, despite being right in front of others moments earlier. Others didn't even leave behind the comfort of a plausible explanation. What's certain is that investigators, families, and communities were left stunned and to this day remain unanswered. Adding to the aura of the triangle are the clashing explanations and theories. The hauntings of the ghost towns, the Native American tales of cursed land, modern ideas like time rifts or interdimensional activity. Everyone seems to have their own belief about what's behind the mysteries. Some point to science, referencing how certain mountainous terrains can disorient people with electromagnetic anomalies or natural dangers like rockfalls and hidden crevices. Others stretch their explanations into the realm of folklore, gateways into other realms, punishment for disregarding supernatural warnings, and UFO involvement. If you speak to some of the locals, particularly those who've spent much time near Glastonbury Mountain, they might tell you the forest here has a way of watching, of making you feel like every step deeper carries an unspoken risk, or that something, somewhere out there, is always one step ahead of you. Despite its reputation, the Bennington Triangle remains a piece of Vermont mythology that doesn't fit neatly into any one explanation. The line between fact and exaggeration, between science and the supernatural, is blurred almost beyond recognition. Yet, the records don't lie. Mitty Rivers vanished. Paula Jean Weldon disappeared on the long trail. James Tedford left a bus that should have been impossible to leave. Paul Jepson and Frida Langer were there one moment and gone the next. These are real people with real backgrounds, and their losses are devastating not just for their loved ones, but for anyone trying to make sense of what happened to them. The Bennington Triangle has become more than a set of spooky anecdotes. It is a real-world enigma, a place where the rules of safety and explanation feel like they've been rewritten. It is a mystery that has never loosened its grip on those who dive into its details, and a haunting reminder of how much we still don't understand. All of that leads us back to 1945 and the disappearance of Midi Rivers. What happened to him on that fateful day? And was it truly the start of something bigger? The disappearance of Midi Rivers, the guide who was never found. Imagine this: a seasoned guide, a man who knew every bend in the trail and every tree in the forest, steps ahead of his group on a crisp November afternoon. He's confident, sure-footed, moving with the ease that only years of experience bring. The woods are quiet, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a bird. His hunting group lingers behind, trusting his knowledge of the terrain to lead them down the right path. But then, in the blink of an eye, he turns a corner and vanishes completely. This is the story of Midi Rivers, the 74-year-old hunting guide whose inexplicable disappearance on November 12, 1945, marked the first in a series of mysteries that would haunt the Bennington Triangle. Rivers was no stranger to the wilderness. In fact, he'd built his life around it. Born and raised in Vermont, he had spent countless days trekking through the dense forests, tracing narrow streams, and navigating the rugged terrain around Glastonbury Mountain. To his friends, family, and the hunting party he accompanied that day, he was the kind of man you'd want to have by your side in the wild. No one doubted his ability to find his way, or theirs. That morning started like so many others for Midi Rivers and his small group of hunters. They set out early, moving along a familiar route near Long Trail Road and Vermont Route 9. The group stayed close at first, but as the hours wore on, Rivers began to take the lead. It was his habit to scout ahead, checking the path for better game trails or moving slightly faster than the others to evaluate their progress. Around midday, he turned to his son-in-law, who was among the hunters, and said he'd be going just a little bit further before circling back. It was an ordinary decision, so unremarkable that no one questioned it. After all, Midi Rivers knew these woods like the back of his hand. But as the group waited, lunch came and went, and Midi didn't return. At first, the others assumed he'd gotten delayed or diverted. Perhaps he had spotted an animal worth tracking. Yet as more time passed, their concern deepened. By 3 p.m., the party decided to retrace their steps and search for him. The woods felt oddly still as they called out his name and scanned their surroundings for any sign of him. They found nothing. Not a disturbed patch of earth, not a footprint, not even the faint sound of his voice echoing back. It was as though the forest had swallowed him whole. Within hours, the search expanded. The hunting party alerted local authorities, and soon an effort that would include more than 300 people began to take shape. Locals joined in droves, concerned for the well-loved guide who had helped countless people navigate Vermont's wilderness over the years. Even U.S. Army soldiers from Fort Devens, Massachusetts, arrived to comb the area. For 8 days, they scoured the forests and hills near Glastonbury Mountain. They formed lines, fanning out through the underbrush, systematically covering every section of land that Midi Rivers might have encountered. The search parties brought in bloodhounds, hopeful that the dogs would catch his scent and lead them to a clue. Or better yet, to Rivers himself. Yet with each passing day, the questions only grew louder, and the answers remained scarce. Finally, one faint trace emerged. In a shallow stream near the area where Rivers had last been seen, searchers discovered a single rifle cartridge. It was the same kind of cartridge Midi was known to carry with him on hunting trips, and its presence suggested it might have fallen from his pocket as he bent down or moved along the uneven stream bed. But beyond this, there were no other signs, no evidence of torn clothing, no footprints leading toward or away from the water. The cartridge, as small and fragile a detail as it was, became the only physical clue the searchers ever uncovered. To this day, its significance remains unclear. Did Mitty drop it accidentally, signaling he had passed through the area? Or, as some began to wonder, was it a red herring, an unrelated artifact in a mystery that refused to give up its secrets? The search officially ended after those grueling 8 days, but for Mitty Rivers' loved ones, the mystery was far from closed. Investigators speculated endlessly. Perhaps he had fallen into a hidden crevice or drowned in a stream. Yet without a body or even a shred of clothing to confirm these theories, they couldn't draw any concrete conclusions. Stranger still, if Rivers had fallen victim to a natural accident, why had the scent trails from the hounds gone cold? It was as though he had walked into thin air, leaving behind no physical or logical explanation for his disappearance. For the locals who'd known Mitty, this event sent chills through the community. The seasoned outdoorsman, whose life revolved around these very woods, would have recognized the signs of danger. He wasn't the kind to get lost, to panic, or to take unnecessary risks. The idea that something as mundane as a misstep could cause his disappearance seemed out of place. And if that wasn't what happened, then what else could explain it? Even years after his case faded from the headlines, whispers persisted. Some said the Bennington Triangle had claimed its first victim. Others feared that Mitty's disappearance might not be random, but part of something darker at work. This silence, the unnerving absence of any definitive answer, was what lingered most. Mitty Rivers was there one moment, walking calmly ahead of his group, and then he was gone. The people who searched for him came away empty-handed after combing the forests as thoroughly as humanly possible. Neither predator, nor weather, nor accident offered any transparent cause. His friends, his family, and his community were left with only the chilling knowledge that someone could be so completely erased, even in a place as familiar as the Bennington Woods. Yet, Mitty Rivers' story was far from the only one of its kind. What no one knew at the time was that his disappearance was just the beginning. The very next year, the Triangle's strange pool would claim another victim. This time, not an experienced woodsman, but a bright young college student who would leave an equally baffling legacy. The story of Paula Jean Weldon, like Mitty Rivers, remains as haunting today as the day her trail went cold. Paula Jean Weldon, the college student who walked into oblivion. On a chilly afternoon in December of 1946, Paula Jean Weldon left her dorm at Bennington College with a simple plan: to take a quick hike on the nearby Long Trail. She told her roommate she wouldn't be gone long and wore a bright red jacket against the cool air. At just 18 years old, Paula was like many college students, curious, independent, and full of life. The idea of a solo adventure didn't seem unusual for her. But as Paula stepped into the woods that day, she was unknowingly walking into a mystery that would forever change her name, her family, and even the state of Vermont. The hike was supposed to be a short escape, a break from the usual routine. The Long Trail, a popular path that winds its way through Vermont's forests, was an ideal spot for someone looking for fresh air and solitude. Witnesses along the way reported seeing her that afternoon. One passing motorist remembered picking up a hitchhiker matching her description, dropping her near the trailhead. Another couple, hiking along the same path, said they saw Paula ahead of them, moving effortlessly along the way. She was reportedly calm, focused, and walking with purpose. Moments later, she turned a corner in the trail, disappearing from their view. When the couple reached that bend themselves, there was no sign of her. Paula was gone. At first, no one panicked. Paula was a teenager on a hike. Maybe she'd gone off trail to take in the view or find someplace quiet to sit. It wasn't until she failed to return that night that her absence took a more ominous turn. By the next morning, her family and classmates realized action was needed, and the search for Paula began. What started as a few worried calls soon became a massive effort. Over 1,000 searchers were deployed to the area, including volunteers, students, and professionals. They scoured the long trail and its surroundings, including Glastonbury Mountain. Aircraft circled overhead, hoping for a sign of her distinct red jacket. Divers explored nearby streams, and bloodhounds were brought in to follow her scent. Every method and tool of the time was used in the search for Paula. But despite all the manpower, technology, and determination, nothing was found. Days stretched into weeks. Not a footprint, a scrap of clothing, or an item from her pack turned up. The bloodhounds, so dependable in most cases, tracked her for a while, but abruptly stopped, just as they would in other disappearances in the Bennington Triangle. It was as though Paula had vanished into nothing, leaving absolutely no trace of where she had gone or what had happened to her. To the searchers, it was a baffling riddle. To her family, it was a nightmare with no answers. As time passed, theories began to swirl. Some wondered if Paula had gotten lost in the woods and succumbed to the freezing temperatures that night. December nights in Vermont can drop below freezing, and without proper gear, hypothermia can set in quickly. However, the thoroughness of the search seemed to make this unlikely. The area was combed again and again. There was nowhere she could have hidden for so long without being found. Others speculated she might have fallen victim to foul play. Could she have trusted the wrong person on the trail? Could someone have been waiting, hidden among the trees, ready to strike? There was even a suspect in the case. A man known for making strange comments about Paula and the investigation. He allegedly bragged about killing her to friends, but no evidence was ever found to link him to the crime. Without a body or sign of struggle, law enforcement couldn't make the accusation stick. One detail that caught the attention of both investigators and the public was Paula's red jacket, a bright, unmistakable piece of clothing that should have been easy to spot. Bright colors like red stand out sharply against the greens and browns of a forest landscape, especially in the winter months when much of the foliage has faded or fallen. Regardless, the search yielded nothing. No jacket, no sign of torn fabric, and no items Paula might have carried with her. It was as though the forest had swallowed her whole, jacket and all. Paula's disappearance didn't just puzzle the public. It exposed a major flaw in Vermont's law enforcement system at the time. The local authorities, including the sheriff's deputies tasked with investigating, were ill-equipped to handle a case of this magnitude. Their resources were limited, their experience much narrower than what was needed for such a large-scale search and investigation. This lack of preparedness frustrated Paula's father, William Archibald Weldon, who was vocal about his criticism of their efforts. His push for more competent law enforcement eventually led to the creation of the Vermont State Police in 1947, just 7 months later. It was a direct response to the challenges exposed by Paula's case and perhaps her most lasting legacy. Yet even for a father grieving his daughter, this wasn't the closure he had hoped for. he would still never find out what happened to her. Theories about Paula's disappearance tied her to the growing lore of the Bennington Triangle. Her story bore striking similarities to that of Middy Rivers, a seasoned hunter who had also vanished from the area a year earlier. Both disappeared without leaving evidence behind, and both seemed to be gone in an instant, just steps away from where witnesses had last seen them. Even her red jacket, a color that would later appear in other triangle disappearances, became part of the eerie pattern emerging in the region. Was the landscape itself to blame, claimed as cursed by Native American tribes? Or could it be something even stranger, a force or mechanism we can't quite explain? The stories from this mysterious area seem to share one chilling trait: a sudden, complete disappearance, and the feeling that something should have been found but wasn't. Yet, as much as Paula's story fits within the Bennington Triangle's unsettling lore, it remains uniquely tragic. Her youth, her potential, and the pain her family endured make her disappearance one of the most haunting of them all. It has now been decades since Paula Jean Weldon left her dorm that day. The Long Trail remains a destination for hikers, and visitors often walk the same paths she once did, perhaps unaware of her story. But for those who know it, her case leaves an indelible mark on the region. The unanswered questions and eerie patterns surrounding her disappearance continue to fuel speculation among those drawn to the mysteries of the Bennington Triangle. And yet, Paula Jean Weldon's story is far from the strangest disappearance tied to this area. Just 3 years later, another case would unfold, one so bizarre it seems almost impossible. How does a man vanish from a moving bus, his belongings left neatly behind? The story of James Tedford is next, and it may be the most unexplainable of them all. James Tedford, the man who vanished from a moving bus. Imagine being surrounded by other passengers on a bus, the hum of the engine filling the air as you glide down a quiet Vermont highway. The road snakes through forests and hills, and the bus makes its measured progress toward Bennington. You glance around and notice an older man sitting among the passengers. He's not drawing much attention. He looks like someone who belongs, with a quiet presence and an air of familiarity. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the rhythm of the ride. When you open them again at the bus's destination, the seat where he sat so calmly is empty. His luggage is still neatly stowed, and a bus schedule lies open on the cushion, but the man himself is gone. No one saw him leave. No one noticed anything strange. He simply vanished. This is the story of James E. Tedford, a World War I veteran who disappeared in what can only be described as impossible circumstances. On December 1st, 1949, the 68-year-old boarded a bus heading toward the Bennington Soldiers' Home, where he was living at the time. Tedford had spent the last few days visiting relatives in St. Albans, Vermont, and was now on his way back to Bennington. By all accounts, it was an uneventful journey at first. He passed the long ride quietly, seated comfortably with his personal belongings next to him, as the bus steadily traveled Route 7 through the Green Mountains, a route that would lead it directly through the heart of the Bennington Triangle. Witnesses later recalled seeing him on the bus at the last stop before Bennington. He was there, in plain sight, alongside other passengers. His face didn't seem worried. His demeanor didn't hint at anything out of the ordinary. When the bus departed from that final stop on its way to Bennington, Tedford remained exactly where he was supposed to be. But somewhere along that remaining stretch of road, an otherwise mundane leg of the trip, James E. Tedford disappeared. When the bus arrived at Bennington, the driver and passengers realized something strange. Tedford's seat was empty. His luggage was still there, as though it had simply been left behind when he stepped out for a moment. An open timetable rested on the cushion as if mid-use, part of the small, ordinary details of a routine trip. But there had been no stops. No one had gotten off the bus since the last stop, and the door had remained closed as the bus sped down its route. The other passengers were bewildered. They couldn't explain it. Tedford had been there, and now he wasn't. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. This wasn't a case of someone slipping out unnoticed during a bathroom break or darting off the vehicle in a moment of confusion. Buses are confined spaces with limited exits and entry points. There was nowhere for Tedford to escape to without being seen. No plausible way for him to leave the moving bus unnoticed. And yet, he wasn't there. From the passengers to the bus driver, everyone was at a loss. There was no apparent means of escape, one account noted, cementing this disappearance as one of the most mystifying events in the region's already unsettling history. What complicates the story further is that Route 7, the road the bus was traveling, cut directly across the Bennington Triangle, that peculiar mountainous region that had already seen its share of strange disappearances over the years. Less than 3 years earlier, Paula Jean Weldon had vanished from the long trail, never to be seen again. Before that, Middy Rivers had disappeared while leading a hunting group, despite being deeply familiar with the area. Tedford's case was different, sealed into its own pocket of weirdness because it occurred not in the forest, but in a controlled, public environment, a bus full of people. When news of Tedford's disappearance began to spread, people were struck by the eerie combination of normalcy and absurdity in his story. A quiet, elderly man on a typical bus ride simply ceasing to exist was something that tugged at the edges of reason. There was no evidence of foul play, no witnesses describing any sort of commotion. Just a timeline that ends abruptly, without warning or explanation. The little details, such as his belongings left behind in perfect order, made the mystery even harder to ignore. If someone was in trouble or acting out of panic, you'd expect chaos. Items scattered, attempts to signal for help. But there was nothing of the sort, just the haunting presence of what he left behind and the unshakable knowledge that something unexplainable had occurred. Investigators looked into the details of Tedford's life, searching for clues, but they didn't find much to guide them. By all appearances, he led a quiet existence centered on routines and the safety of his home at the Soldiers' Home in Bennington. There was no indication that he was planning to run away, nor any signs of personal turmoil. His visit to relatives in St. Albans had been uneventful, filling what should have been simple pages in the story of his life. But 1949 would become the final chapter, and perhaps the most enduringly bizarre one. For those already familiar with the growing legend of the Bennington Triangle, Tedford's vanishing fit eerily well into a broader, more troubling pattern. Here was yet another individual who disappeared without a trace. Another case where there was nothing tangible to examine, no evidence to suggest what had happened. While Paula Weldon's red jacket might symbolize the frustrating absence of physical clues, and Middy Rivers' rifle cartridge might hint at wilderness dangers, Tedford's case stood apart because it wasn't tied to the isolating shadows of the forest. His was an urban mystery in a rural context, something steeped not in the wild unknown, but in the unsettling disruption of routine. A bus isn't a chaotic, unpredictable space, it's ordinary. Yet, even here, the rules didn't seem to apply. Speculation ran wild, as it always does when a logical explanation is nowhere to be found. Some believed that Tedford's fate could be tied to the supernatural pull of the Bennington Triangle itself, a force so strong that even the confines of a bus provided no protection. Others posited stranger theories involving bizarre interdimensional disturbances, suggesting that the very landscape of the region might have opened momentarily to claim him. Anything seemed possible in the face of such an impossible mystery. Even today, memories of Tedford's case send a chill down the spines of those who hear it. Something about his disappearance, a veteran traveling home, his life and belongings neatly arranged, his route passing directly through a stretch of land haunted by decades of unexplained phenomena, makes it all feel intentional, as though some greater force was at work. The case didn't just trouble those who knew him. It became part of a larger conversation about what makes the Bennington Triangle such an enduring source of unease. James Tedford disappeared over 70 years ago, leaving unanswered questions that deepen with time. How does someone vanish so completely in an enclosed space, surrounded by witnesses? What could erase a man so quietly, without leaving a single thread to unravel? These questions linger, as do the growing whispers of dread surrounding the Bennington Triangle. But for now, the story moves forward to a disappearance so devastating, it still haunts the community today. What happens when innocence meets the unexplainable? The story of Paul Jepson is next. 6. Paul Jepson, the boy who was just gone. On October 12th, 1950, a quiet autumn day in Shaftesbury, Vermont, a mother's life took a devastating turn that would become another chapter in the growing mystery of the Bennington Triangle. 8-year-old Paul Jepson was an energetic boy, a bundle of curiosity like many children his age. His family called him Buddy, a name that perfectly captured his friendly, spirited nature. That day, as his mother worked at the local dump caring for pigs, Buddy came along to keep her company, waiting in their truck while she went about her chores. The task only took about an hour, but when she returned to check on him, the truck was empty. Buddy was gone. At first, she thought he might have wandered off nearby, perhaps following his curiosity into the surrounding area. But as she searched, calling his name louder and more frantically, no sign of Buddy emerged. Her heart sank as the unsettling truth began to settle in. Her son had disappeared. His mother later admitted to having an odd feeling about the area, one she had felt for years. She normally wouldn't have let her son out of her sight there, but on this day, she went against her instincts. It was a choice that would haunt her forever. What happened next was every parent's nightmare. A full search was launched, drawing in neighbors, local authorities, and even a bloodhound to trace the boy's path. The dog picked up his scent around the dump and followed it along a logging road that cut through the wooded landscape. The trail led to an intersection near a stream, but then, without warning, it stopped. The bloodhound, seemingly confused, circled the area but found nothing further to follow. It was as if Buddy had simply disappeared into thin air. There were no footprints leading off into the woods, no pieces of clothing caught on branches, no sounds calling back from the forest. Nothing, just silence and the unsettling void where an innocent child should have been. Buddy's last known detail, the red jacket he wore, stood out starkly in the search. It was bright and unmistakable, the kind of color you'd expect to spot right away against the muted tones of autumn leaves or the earth-toned landscape of a rural dump. Yet no trace of it ever appeared. The red jacket detail became more than a missing person's identifier. It was also a haunting reminder of Paula Jean Weldon's disappearance just 4 years earlier. She, too, had been wearing a red jacket when she vanished, a fact that now felt less like coincidence and more like a cryptic thread connecting these disappearances. In both cases, the vibrant color, meant to make the wearer easy to find, had only deepened the mystery by its absence. The dump where Buddy disappeared was unremarkable to most people, but locals familiar with the growing legends surrounding the Bennington Triangle might have felt differently. The location was eerily close to the Long Trail, where Paula Jean Weldon disappeared in 1946, and not far from other areas associated with unexplained vanishings over the years. It wasn't just the proximity that stirred unease, it was the shared eeriness of how these cases unfolded. Each disappearance struck without warning, and each seemed to leave no physical evidence behind, feeding into the growing reputation of the region as a place where people simply disappeared. Theories about Paul's fate ranged from plausible to unimaginable. Some believed he had wandered onto the nearby highway and was picked up by someone passing through, a case of abduction that investigators could not prove due to the lack of witnesses or evidence. Others suggested he may have fallen victim to a tragic accident, perhaps slipping into a stream. But the thorough searches of the area, both on foot and with trained dogs, contradicted this theory. The scent trail leading to the crossroads disappeared without explanation, and no small body was ever recovered from the nearby water. Those less grounded in conventional explanations turned to the paranormal. Could the Bennington Triangle itself have been at work here? Pattern seekers pointed to the startling similarities in these disappearances. The red clothing, the suddenly lost scent trails, and the geographical closeness of the cases. The idea of a cursed land, long whispered about in Native American lore, felt less like folklore and more like an unsettling possibility. To the Abenaki tribe, Glastonbury Mountain was a place of danger, a forbidden realm where the rules of the natural world might bend or break entirely. Buddy Jepson's disappearance, just like those before it, seemed to fit snugly into this legend of a land that could take people and leave no trace. For Paul's mother, however, the Bennington Triangle wasn't some abstract legend or spooky campfire story. It was the place that had taken her son. She was left with grief, guilt, and questions no one could answer. Why hadn't she followed her better judgment that morning? What was it about the area that had pulled her son away? These questions haunted her in the years to come, just as Buddy's disappearance haunted the broader community. His story wasn't simply a tragedy. It was one more piece of an agonizing puzzle, stretching back at least a decade, with no clear solutions in sight. Unlike some other victims of the Triangle's mysteries, Buddy's youth amplified the horror of his disappearance. An adult might misstep or become disoriented in the woods, but a small child leaves an unmistakable mark when they move through the world. Their footsteps are lighter, their curiosity more instinct-driven, and their trust in adults makes them unlikely to intentionally hide. The fact that there wasn't even a thread of evidence, nothing tangible to say, "He went this way," was harder for searchers to accept. It was as though the forest had erased him entirely. Over time, Buddy Jepson's disappearance became one of the most chilling tales to come from the Bennington Triangle. It wasn't just the suddenness of his vanishing that unnerved people. It was the piling up of unanswered questions. Why did the scent trail stop? Why didn't the searchers find the bright red jacket? What force, natural or otherwise, could simply snatch a child so completely? The growing connections to other disappearances only compounded the fear. No single theory, whether foul play, accident, or something supernatural, accounted for all the details. And as more people looked at the pattern of disappearances, a strange thought began to form. The Bennington Triangle almost seemed to pick its victims. It didn't matter if they were young or old, new to the area or familiar. It didn't matter if they were alone in the wilderness or surrounded by others in a more controlled environment. If it wanted someone, it took them. Today, there's still no clear answer to what happened to Paul Jepson. His story remains as quiet and unresolved as the logging road, where his trail abruptly ended. The community that once searched for him has long since moved on, yet the weight of his disappearance still lingers. Those who study the history of the Bennington Triangle often return to his case for its chilling simplicity. A child, a red jacket, a mother who looked away for just a moment, and then nothing. But Paul Jepson wasn't the last to fall victim to the Triangle's chilling grasp. Later that same year, another disappearance rocked the region, but this time the story had a grim twist. Unlike every case before it, the next victim was eventually found. What searchers discovered raised just as many questions as it sought to answer. The case of Frida Langer, a woman whose body reappeared months after she vanished, is next, and it's one of the darkest in the Bennington Triangle's lore. Frida Langer, the mystery of the found body. Imagine standing in the middle of an expansive forest. The crisp autumn air brushes against your skin, and the soft crunch of leaves underfoot is your only companion. You pause to take in the wilderness around you, thinking how vast yet silent it all feels. Now imagine that silence breaking with laughter, the voice of a woman enjoying a simple moment on a hike with family. For 53-year-old Frida Langer, this day in October of 1950 should have been just that. A peaceful hike during a camping trip near the Somerset Reservoir. But when Frida suddenly slipped into a stream and decided to head back to camp alone to change her wet clothes, no one could have guessed that she was walking into a mystery that, even now, refuses to let go of its secrets. Frida was familiar with these woods. Growing up in Vermont, she developed a comfort with the outdoors, and this family trip was a chance to reconnect with nature. That morning, she ventured out on a short hike with her cousin, Herbert Elsner. The trail was an easy one, a loop that led away from the campsite and meandered through the quiet terrain. It wasn't supposed to take long, and when Frida stumbled into the water, her reaction was practical and straightforward. She wasn't far from the campsite. She told Herbert she'd head back, change into dry clothes, and meet him on the trail shortly. It was such a quick and reasonable plan that Herbert didn't give it a second thought. At least, not until more time passed than it should have. Frida didn't return to the trail. An hour turned into 2, and when Herbert finally made his way back to the campsite, he was startled to realize Frida hadn't returned there either. The family began their own search immediately, calling her name and checking the trail she would have used to find her way back from the stream. But there was no sign of her, none of the usual clues, like footprints or fallen branches in her wake. No fabric snagged on bushes, no indication that Frida had even made it partway back. The campsite, so close to where she had started, felt shockingly far away in that moment. As day turned to night, the family knew this was beyond what they could handle alone. They called for help. What followed was one of the largest searches Vermont had ever seen. Up to 300 people joined the effort, organized and relentless in their approach. For 2 solid weeks, the area near the Somerset Reservoir was combed. Search parties moved in coordinated lines, ensuring every section of the woods was observed and checked. Aircraft and helicopters flew overhead. Search dogs were brought in to track her movements. The intensity of the search reflected the growing urgency, the realization that the clock was ticking and they were racing against time. But even with all these resources, no answers emerged. Each day ended in frustration and the heavy weight of Frida's growing absence. Where could she have gone? What made it feel even stranger was how close she should have been to safety. Frida wasn't at the far end of an isolated trail or deep within the folds of a remote forest. She was yards away from camp when she left her cousin. The site itself was a hub for activity with her family present and others staying at nearby locations. This wasn't an untouched wilderness. It was supposed to be a comforting, populated area. And yet, she'd vanished as though the trees and ground had simply opened up beneath her. Months passed before Frida was found. It wasn't until early May of 1951, after the long Vermont winter had loosened its icy grip on the land, that her body was discovered. The location, about 3.5 miles from her campsite, in the eastern branch of the Deerfield River. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, but what made it even more unsettling was that this wasn't some remote area that had been overlooked. The site where her remains were found had already been searched, not once, but multiple times during those initial 2 weeks. Searchers had passed through these woods, examined these areas, and come up empty-handed. How was it possible that Frida's body appeared in a place investigators had already scoured? It gets stranger. By the time Frida's remains were found, they were so badly decomposed that determining a cause of death was impossible. Any clues her body might have held, whether she'd suffered an injury or been a victim of foul play, were lost to time. This left investigators with only more questions. Was her death a tragic accident? Perhaps a fall that left her incapacitated and vulnerable to the elements? Could someone have moved her there after the search was completed, leaving her body in a disturbingly visible spot? Or, as some have speculated, was her disappearance and puzzling reappearance tied to something even more bizarre? The question of Frida's body being moved gripped many. If the area had truly been searched, then her remains appearing there later was almost impossible to explain. Family members and locals wondered whether the initial searches hadn't been thorough, or whether something or someone deliberately relocated her in an act that can only be described as chilling. This unease only grew as Frida became the first and only case in the Bennington Triangle saga where remains were ever recovered. Yet this, instead of answering the series of mysterious disappearances, only deepened the enigma. Her case stands out because it offers a contradiction. If Frida's body had been discovered right away, it would have pointed toward a conventional, albeit tragic conclusion: an accidental injury, wilderness exposure, or a natural mishap. If her body were never found at all, her story might have become just another thread in the haunting pattern driving the Bennington Triangle's infamy. But what actually happened? A disappearance, a later reappearance in a previously searched spot, and no clarity on how she died, defies both categories. It places Frida's case in a space where fact and the unknown collide, lingering like an unsettling whisper about the nature of what might happen in the Bennington Triangle. Frida Langer's disappearance and rediscovery fueled renewed attention to what was already an eerie legacy in the region. Unlike the cases of Paula Jean Weldon, Mitty Rivers, James Tedford, or Paul Jepson, hers introduced the element of a physical return, a conclusion without closure. Speculation refused to die. Was this truly the work of natural forces, or was there something happening in the forests of Vermont that defied explanation? There's no way to know. The condition of her remains, The disturbing realization surrounding the previous searches and the unnerving absence of evidence made Frida Lange's story less an ending and more a question mark hanging ominously over the area. To this day, her case remains a milestone in the lore of the Bennington Triangle, a sharp reminder that even when answers seem within reach, they can slip through our fingers. Frida's loss, much like the 5-year wave of vanishings that came before her, adds to a growing list of unsettling mysteries in these dense Vermont woods. What connects them all? Humanity's search for patterns and reasons fails to fully crack the question of what happens in the Bennington Triangle. But Frida's case, the only one where a body surfaced, feels like the most haunting clue of all. Sometimes, even when you find what you're looking for, the answers are no closer than when you started. But what creates such patterns? How can an entire region swallow people almost at will? To make sense of it, or to attempt to, we have theories. What could be behind the vanishings? Could the Bennington Triangle be more than a geographic oddity? Could it be a breach in our understanding, a crossroads where certainty breaks apart into a web of unsettling possibilities? The disappearances in this eerie Vermont region have left the world staring into a void, searching for an explanation that never fully resolves. Over the years, theories have ranged from the practical to the utterly absurd, each fighting to explain a mystery that seems determined to remain unsolved. Some look at the obvious first, the landscape itself. Glastonbury Mountain and its surrounding forests are a harsh and unforgiving environment. If you wander too far off the beaten path, the dense trees and uneven terrain make it dangerously easy to lose your sense of direction. Add in the sudden turns in Vermont weather, fog that can settle in seconds, cold nights that can steal your warmth, and you have a recipe for tragedy. A wrong step near a rocky ravine or a missed turn on a fading trail could lead to a deadly accident. But there's a catch. None of the known cases in the Bennington Triangle left behind the kind of evidence that would point to a simple wilderness accident. There were no discarded backpacks, no torn clothing from a tumble down a slope, no scattered items telling a story of misstep and misfortune. The disappearances leave behind a distinct lack of trace, as if something more than bad luck is at play. Others wonder about the possibility of predators lurking in the shadows. Mountain lions, though thought to be extinct in Vermont by the mid-1900s, are sometimes reported in hushed whispers and anecdotal stories. These cats are stealthy hunters, capable of stalking prey silently for miles. A startled hiker caught in the wrong moment might not have had any time to react, but the theory falters quickly. Wildcats leave signs, tracks, torn clothes, blood. Only in Frida Lange's case was a body ever found, and even then, there were no wounds to suggest an animal attack. For all the triangle's silence, here it seems louder. The sound of every missing clue echoing in the space where answers should be. Then there's the dark spectre of human intent. Could the area have played host to a serial predator? A person with malicious intent who used the forest's isolation as a hunting ground? On the surface, it might seem like a logical explanation. The dense woods and quiet trails could shield a killer from being spotted, allowing them to strike without witnesses. But serial crime, like predatory animals, leaves tracks. And in these cases, there's nothing obvious to pin down that kind of theory. The victims, men, women, young, old, don't fit any clear profile. There's no pattern in the disappearances that points to a single person's actions. Investigators have long dismissed this explanation due to the absence of forensic evidence. It seems unlikely that a human hand could work with such consistency and leave so little behind. If these grounded explanations fail to satisfy, it's no surprise that some turn to the supernatural. Every region has its legends, and in the Bennington Triangle, that legend has a form: the Bennington Monster. This creature, described as a towering, hairy beast with glowing eyes, has reportedly been sighted in the region for centuries. One story, dating back to the 1800s, tells of a stagecoach driver who encountered massive tracks in the mud near Glastonbury Mountain, followed by the appearance of a hulking figure that pushed the coach off the road. Could this be the lurking presence behind the disappearances? The stories are thin on evidence, but they feed into the energy surrounding the triangle, a place already steeped in unease and mystery. For some, the idea of the Bennington Monster isn't any less plausible than the other baffling theories. But the skies carry their own intrigue when it comes to the paranormal. UFO enthusiasts have latched onto the sudden, almost surgical way in which Bennington Triangle victims seem to vanish. In their view, the area might serve as a hotspot for alien activity. The idea ties into the loss of scent trails by search dogs, a detail that seems to suggest the missing individuals didn't wander or fall, but were instead removed entirely, lifted beyond reach. Though no spacecraft sightings align directly with the disappearances, the lack of evidence leaves room for the imagination to fill in the blanks. Could something extraterrestrial have marked Glastonbury Mountain as their territory, their experiment? The thought lingers, not proven, but not fully dismissible either. If UFOs sound fantastical, then theories of interdimensional rifts push the boundaries further. The idea here is that the Bennington Triangle might be one of those rare places where the fabric of reality itself grows thin. Some have suggested that geological phenomena, magnetic anomalies for example, might create conditions where people don't just get lost, but slip away entirely. Time slips are another concept tied to this theory, imagining that certain disappearances could be explained by victims unintentionally walking into another dimension, one hidden from our own. This might sound like science fiction, but these ideas are often fueled by the peculiar details that already define natural laws, like those cold scent trails and the eerie precision with which individuals seem to dissolve into nothingness. Of course, the explanation that goes back longest of all is tied to those who first walked the land, the Abenaki people. To them, Glastonbury Mountain was sacred, but not in a comforting way. It was a cursed place, a forbidden realm where the rules of nature twisted into something dangerous. The warnings they passed down carried deep significance, stories of people entering the wilderness and never returning. Could these disappearances be a kind of consequence, a punishment for disregarding the unspoken laws of a place meant to remain untouched? Local folklore holds these beliefs close, and over time, they've intertwined with the Triangle's legacy, making it hard to separate fact from the enduring weight of legend. There's also something ominous about the patterns that emerge when you look closer. Most of these disappearances happened between October and December, in the Triangle's colder, darker months. Some happened in eerily similar time windows, often late afternoon between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., when the sun starts to fall and shadows stretch longer across the trees. It's the kind of detail that nags at anyone poring over the facts. Is it coincidence? Is it tied to the rising risks of hiking as the daylight fades? Or could it mean something else, something we can't quite see? Perhaps most unsettling is the way no single theory contains the answers. The victims' fates resist categorization, slipping between the cracks of logic and fact. Each idea, whether grounded in nature, criminal intent, or the extraordinary, offers a piece of the puzzle, but never the full picture. The Bennington Triangle sits in a space of uncertainty where questions pile up faster than answers, and every explanation feels incomplete. Maybe that's what makes these mysteries so enthralling and so frightening. So the question remains, could the Bennington Triangle hold forces beyond what we can explain? Or are its secrets simply locked away by the isolation of the wilderness, its truths hidden forever among hills and trees that never forget? Whatever the answer may be, the mysteries of this eerie place linger, pressing us to question what the world is capable of and how firmly we trust the ground beneath our feet. Imagine standing on the edge of the Bennington Triangle, where dense forests seem to stretch infinitely and silence feels heavier than it should. For decades, this patch of Vermont has been a magnet for the unexplainable. The stories of those who disappeared, Middy Rivers, Paula Weldon, James Tedford, Paul Jepson, and Frida Langer, echo through the trees, unanswered and unsettling. Could this be the work of forces beyond our understanding? Or is the truth hidden closer than we think? The Green Mountains hold their secrets tightly, and it leaves you wondering, how safe is any place, even the ones we trust the most?